Welcome to Woke House YouTube channel. So there was some bracelets out not too long ago that said, "What would Jesus do?" And there was kind of a controversy over what that meant and what he would actually be doing. And some people have some weird ideas about what Jesus would be doing right now. But I thought it would be fun to discuss somewhat what possibly Buddha would do if he was living in our time, in the political climate that we live in, the various situations that are going on our planet right now. If Buddha was here, would he start a nonprofit? Would he create a charity to help people? Would he build a huge monastery? What would Buddha do? Or would he live a homeless life, contemplating, and spending time in meditation and just speak one-on-one with the people that he came in contact with? Would he put together another big Sangha like he did when he was here 2,600 years ago, a huge community? And maybe that's only by looking in the past can we have any idea of what we think Buddha might be doing right now. And what we see is he lived in a time of turmoil. This world's always been in turmoil. So in a lot of ways, things going on in the world during his time, they're never much different. The world seems to stay pretty much the same. There's wars and rumors of wars and pestilence and anger and greed and desire and problems of all kinds. You have divorce, you have murder, you have lying, you have cheating, you have killing, and you have good things. You have good people doing good things. You have people that are working hard. You have people that are ultra rich for no reason. You have anything that we can possibly imagine now, except for maybe nukes. Buddha had them in his time. So looking back at what he did while he lived, we could kind of see, maybe have some type of idea of what he would be doing now. So from my limited view and perspective, I can see that what Buddha did was he renounced society. He left society. He left occupation. He left politics. He left the economy. He left everything in the system of his time, which I assume he thought that A, that system was corrupt, or B, that he couldn't focus all of his attention on spiritual liberation by living under that system. So what he did, or what eventually happened, was he created an alternative community or an alternative system. So he went out alone and became a homeless wanderer, but then as he started teaching, people started following him, and so then it became its own commune, its own community. And he didn't want to be the leader of it, but he was the spiritual leader or the spiritual coach. And he led by example and he led by his teachings, but he didn't seek a place of authority in this community. So he came out of society, he started his own society or his own culture, but at the same time, he never lived too far outside of that culture, of that society. His community very much lived off of the generosity of society, because we have to remember that his monks and nuns didn't work, they didn't raise cattle, they didn't farm or anything like that. So once a day, they went on alms rounds. Well, I'll say that 500 times fast. Alms rounds. So they went around with these bowls around their neck, or at least holding a bowl, and whatever people were generous enough to put in the bowl is what they ate. It might have been rice, it might have been meat, it might have been vegetables, it might have been some type of bread, but whatever was put in those bowls, they couldn't refuse it. They had to eat it. They did that once a day. So Buddha created his own society, he created his own culture, and they lived apart, but they very much depended on society as a whole. So that's one way of escaping the culture and doing your own thing. But you and I are not monks. Most of us are not monks or nuns, and we're not going to renounce the householder or leave our occupations or our homes or whatever to become homeless. So what will we do, or what can we learn from the Buddha? I assume we can learn that just as Buddha came out of the broken system, and he created his own economy, he created his own occupation, you can say, if teaching is an occupation. He created his own culture. We too can create some kind of counterculture community that's outside of the broken system. Now, we'll have, many of us will have to work or farm or raise animals or chickens or whatever to survive, and still probably utilize aspects of the bigger society like technology, things like that. But we can see that Buddha might, he might advise us to get off the grid as much as we can. We could use solar energy, wind energy, and do things, recycle everything, make our own clothing, just have as low as impact or as small as footprint as we can in this alternate community. To do things that aren't destructive to ourselves, destructive to the planet that we live on. And maybe if enough people decide to create these type of alternative societies or alternative communities, eventually, bit by bit, it affects the overall society. We know that our system is broken, everything from the medical system to the economy to the political system. All these systems are broken. We're still going on these old, we're still using fossil fuels, for God's sake. So the technology to get away from fossil fuels has existed for over 100 years. But it's going to take small bits of people to break away and leave the system. And as I say, they may need to depend on aspects of that system for a while until they become totally self-sufficient. But just like Buddha, we can create something different that goes a counterculture or goes against the grain of what's happening now. And as more and more of us leave the system itself is going to have to follow us. It's going to have to keep up with us. It's going to have to keep up with the new things. Everybody knows that businesses are going to, when they start losing customers, they're going to adjust to that. So if we show that we're no longer slaves to fashion or slaves to entertainment or slaves to gasoline or oil, the companies are going to have to catch up with that, and the politicians also. When we decide that we are not even listening to the politicians anymore, that we're electing our own politicians outside of the broken system, then the government's going to have to stand up and take notice of that. But on a very practical level, I can think of two stories about Buddha as far as what he would be doing right now that might illustrate the way that he would take action, not on a huge level of creating this whole alternative society, but just as a very individual level. There's a story of Buddha walking through his Sangha or through his community and actually seeing a monk that was laying there dying. And this monk had sores all over his body, and he was filthy, and he was laying in his own feces and his own throw up. And this was right here in the middle of their camp. right there in the middle of their community. And Buddha was like, oh my God, like what? How come nobody has helped this guy? And so Buddha himself picked this guy up and took him into a clean area and bathed the guy himself. And he got some medicine and he cleaned every little wound, every little scabbed up area, every part of, every abrasion that he had on his body. The Buddha cleaned it and bandaged this guy up when he was completely clean and put medication on him, and then went and got some clean clothes and put it on this guy. And then he started feeding him and giving him water. And when the other monks started, showing up, Buddha was like, how, like, I'm teaching every single day about love and compassion and creating merit and generosity, and you guys are just gonna let this guy die? I mean, covered in his own feces? Like, you're not even gonna help this dude right here in the middle of our camp? Like, let's go back to the drawing board. So Buddha showed as an example, he role modeled good behavior. And there's another story like that I would like to, tell you about quickly. These are just coming to my mind right now. There's so many different stories, but there was these two scholars of these other faith traditions, and Buddha was walking by, and these two scholars were debating about the life of an animal when an animal dies. And Buddha turned to look at them, and he heard part of their conversation. And they were saying, if an animal dies, does it get reincarnated? Does it come back as the same animal or a different animal? Does an animal acquire merit? Could he be born a human? What happens to an animal after it dies? And when Buddha looked away from them, he saw that they were actually looking at a deer that had been shot by an arrow. Apparently, a hunter had shot the deer, and the deer escaped, ran through the forest, but then when it got exhausted, it fell. And so the deer was laying there with an arrow, and it was having a hard time breathing, and it was panting and thirsty and suffering. And one of the scholars asked Buddha, he said, what do you think, what do your teachings say about animals after they die? And Buddha once again was like, oh my God, like, why aren't you two guys helping this deer? So he ran over there, and they say he plucked the arrow out of the deer, he picked it up, and he carried it off down to the stream, and he got some moss, and he cleaned the wound, he packed the wound, he bandaged it, he gave the deer some water, he nursed it back to health until the deer was able to take care of itself and run off into the forest. So once again, we see, on a huge scale, in order to affect society, Buddha created an alternative community that ran totally different, totally counter to the way his society was running at that time. People say that Buddha was the first one that came up with democracy. And also they say, Buddhism was the first university. So that Sangha, they were teaching each other Buddhist teachings, and that was like the first university. And that even goes up to Nalanda University, which was huge, major Buddhist studies institute or university. It was one of the first in the world of any type of university. So Buddha started a community where they were learning together, which was a type of university. And then much later, there was Nalanda, which was like the first official university in the whole world. And so he created a different culture. He created learning centers. And then in a very practical way, he did whatever was at hand to do. When he saw somebody was sick, he went and helped that sick person. When he saw an animal that was in distress, he went and helped that animal. So those are two ways that we can perceive of Buddha advising us. Number one, look at a big level of what we can do and get started doing that. But that, in a very practical way, do whatever's at hand. Help the animal, help the person, help the planet in any way we can that's right here and right now in front of us. So I just thought we would talk about that today. What would Buddha do? This is just my perspective. If you have any ideas of what you think Buddha would be doing during our time, you can post comments below. Thank you. Namaste.